Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. The topic of today is standardizing portfolio-wide management solutions. And my name is Amber Hegeman, and I will be hosting today's presentation. As a reminder, the webinar is not intended to provide legal advice. We actually have two experts that are going to be joining us from IWC. IWC Innovations is our TELS and direct supply water consultants, and we have had a great partnership over the last few years and continue to grow and expand the solutions that we're able to provide for you. Today, we have two presenters that are going to bring you lots of knowledge and expertise. First is Jack Murphy. He is the Chief Revenue Officer for IWC Innovations, and he is an ISSE certified Legionella water and safety management specialist. He has expertise in water management industry, specializing in Legionella and water pathogen risk management. Jack was instrumental on the integration of water management plans into the direct supply TELS system. Jack's leadership and expertise and visual skill set helps him successfully multitask and drive revenue, leading sales agents and global business development partners, all while organizing and analyzing the complex marketing strategy of IWC. Next, we have Bill Pearson. He is a certified water technologist with more than 40 years experience in water management treatment industry. He specializes in Legionella and the water pathogen risk management as well. He currently serves as a liaison of the Association of Water Technologies to the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air, and Cooling Engineers, also known as ASHRAE, and the Cooling Technology Institute. Also, he serves as a chair of the CTI Legionella Guidelines Committee, and Bill is also receptionist of the prestigious Ray Mayer Memorial Water Technologist of the Year Award. He has written numerous publications covering various aspects of the water treatment and Legionella, and is the primary author of AWT Legionella document. Bill is currently the ASHRAE Learning Institute instructor for ASHRAE Standard 188 and an instructor in AWT's training seminar program covering Legionella for water treatment professionals. Needless to say, I leave you in good hands, and I am thrilled to introduce Jack and Bill to you for today's webinar. Jack?
Thank you, Amber. Bill, you've been a busy guy over the last, 35, 40 years or so, really earning a lot of different credentials out there. But good morning, everyone. Bill, myself, and the entire IWC Innovations team, who are also tuning in around the country, are really excited to be back in front of the Direct Supply TELS audience to discuss a complex topic that is Legionella and water safety. As Amber mentioned, we've had a very deep partnership with Direct Supply, and most importantly, the customers within the Direct Supply TELS universe, in TELS Nation, as it's so lovingly called. And over the past few years, we've presented on a variety of topics, from creating water management plans to discussing how to navigate Department of Health case investigations and how to manage reoccurring Legionella issues and pesky continued test results. And today, we're going to describe a really interesting and innovative model that has emerged out of the interactions and engagements with folks just like you. And what's amazing about the senior living industry is that there are so many reasons our phone rings, but it boils down to one thing: the residents. And today we are going to give you more information to take back to your teams that will help to improve the health of your buildings and the satisfaction of your residents. But with that little introduction, we're going to start out by reviewing some of the basics of Legionella, as everyone is coming to us with a different background. So we really like to start with a baseline information. And some of you have had extensive experience managing Legionella, and some of you may be new to this topic, but we really like to start it by boiling it down to its simplest element. So what is Legionella? So Legionella is a waterborne pathogen responsible for a deadly form of pneumonia by the name of Legionnaire's disease. And you'll hear Bill refer to it as Legionella pneumonia as we move forward as well. But the bacteria, where does it come from? Well, it occurs naturally in the environment, and it's delivered to our buildings by the municipal water supply. So once it gets to our buildings, building water systems, especially those in senior living, can provide a very friendly environment for bacteria to proliferate. And proliferation can be accelerated by stagnation of water, what we call water age and dead legs. And, think of some unoccupied units that you might have in your community. Temperature of the water, as Legionella likes to live in temperatures from 77 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Water that is low in residual disinfectant contributes to Legionella growth. And then water that is high has a high sediment content because that functions as a food source for the bacteria. I believe Bill likes to call that the STAR methodology, or the STAR method of thinking about some of the main factors that lead to Legionella growth. But, as we look at data and research, Legionella has often been associated with cooling towers. But really, as we look at the data, the highest risk for Legionella is in the potable water system. So that water that people are using every single day and consuming for a variety of different purposes. And the highest risk within your potable water system is the hot water system. So, a lot of times as we're looking and analyzing risk, we're looking at the design and makeup of your hot water heating devices, the hot water system overall. But once Legionella has proliferated in the building water system, it causes infection by getting into the lungs of a susceptible individual. And that happens through aerosolized droplets of water from very common devices in the building, like sinks, showers, ice machines, and medical devices. So if you've ever gone into your bathroom, turned on a shower, walked away for a minute, you see the steam floating in the air, you breathe in those water droplets and it gets into your lungs. So, just because you're coming in contact with those water droplets doesn't mean you're necessarily going to automatically develop Legionella pneumonia. There's really three conditions that need to be met. First, you have to come in contact with the source of Legionella bacteria. It has to get into your lungs in a way, or you have to come in contact with that source in a way that water is actually entering your lungs. And then you have to have conditions that make you susceptible to the disease. However, 25% of cases occur in otherwise healthy individuals. Bill, I would say, one thing I want to ask you, and something that I get asked quite often, is what would you say is the highest risk device within a senior living facility?
Thank you, Jack. Yes, the senior living space, because of the population, because of their some very severely immunocompromised, there's a host of factors. I mean, starting with if you're a smoker, that's associated with being more susceptible to contracting this lung disease, as well as diabetes, COPD, etc. But within the living space, I would say those healthy enough but yet compromised, would get a large exposure from showering if we had the Legionella in that building's water system. So that would be the most direct route. You mentioned it. You're looking right up into it. You're breathing it in, and the shower produces an aerosol small enough that it is respirable. In other words, goes right into it. Real quick, just a second note, and not to forget, because not everybody is, even able to take showers or want to in this space. But we have a lot of individuals, particularly stroke victims, who have swallowing difficulty. And what they tend to do when they are taking in fluids is aspirate them, which is a direct route into the lungs again. So if that water has Legionella and gets aspirated direct into the lungs, that can set up the course of infection.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. That is a key second kind of way to acquire that into your lungs. And, one additional note that we also like to talk about is that Legionella doesn't discriminate between skilled nursing and assisted living. Skilled nursing is regulated by CMS to have a water management plan and policies and procedures. The assisted living and independent living world is not necessarily regulated, but Legionella bacteria does not know that. And so when we talk about some of these strategies, it's really going to be a ubiquitous approach with different orientations around it. But really, that has been a key kind of evolution in the thought process over the last few years. And kind of continuing on from our Legionella basics and the Legionella overview, is that we've seen a massive shift in the way many senior living organizations are viewing Legionella and water safety. It used to just be a means to an end around satisfying a new requirement when CMS came out with their S&C letter in 2017. And it shifted to organizations becoming extremely proactive around infection prevention. And our hypothesis is that the pandemic has driven an increased awareness around preventing disease in general. And also, senior living professionals are just much more knowledgeable about this topic. Before 2017, the only way you knew about this topic, or the way many people knew about this topic, was if you had to deal with a suspected case in your facility. But now it is becoming more common knowledge, and we're seeing a lot of mind share, and a lot, like, the baseline level of knowledge has really raised. Additionally, surveyors are becoming much more knowledgeable on this topic as well. And the launch of the new requirements of participation has created more clarity around exactly what to look for during a survey. So we've actually seen an increase in the inbound demand from organizations saying, hey, I just had a surveyor in here. They're asking about water management plans. They're asking about testing. And it's almost been a renewed focus. And I think, coming out of the pandemic, obviously that threw everything for a loop, but I think surveyors are getting back into their kind of standard mindset and knowing what to look for. And it's the whole mindset has gone from, I just need to get a water management plan in place because I have to, or I have a case in my building and need to satisfy the DOH, to what do I need to do to ensure maximum risk prevention? It's a real willingness and desire to be proactive. And, Bill had a really good statement when we were talking earlier today, where he said, these organizations are world-class. We're seeing a lot of really great approach, really smart people. And when you look across a portfolio of buildings, one or two bad apples, or one or two, people that don't necessarily fall in line with some standardization really can deter a lot of the progress that's made throughout this organization. So the whole goal here is to say, how do I create a standardized offering and a standardized approach? It doesn't mean everything's cookie cutter, but how do I implement a lot of these practices across, my entire portfolio to protect our brand reputation, to really protect what it is that we've built so much. And there's a lot of really proud brands out there. So we're seeing this major shift. And then, so naturally, when we engage with folks within senior living, they like to know what it is that we as Legionella consultants can do for them. And as Amber mentioned, we've worked with Tells Nation for the last 6 years or so. It's pretty crazy to think we're in 2023 right now. But there's a variety of reasons that senior living organizations engage their Legionella consultants. Overall, there are many outcomes that we can drive when we dig in and work with an individual building or region or corporation. And some of those most common outcomes we can drive are, resident safety and infection prevention. It really boils down to helping to reduce the number of cases of Legionnaire's disease. And I would say, kind of the gold standard and the most altruistic and high level goal is 0 cases of Legionnaire's disease. There's a variety of ways to get there, but that's ultimately what we're looking for when we engage in is kind of the primary function. The second is reducing the overall risk profile of your organization. I'm not going to say that a robust Legionella program or water management program, water safety program is going to be the silver bullet to getting lower insurance premiums or, really cost savings in that area. But it really helps to contribute to reducing the overall risk profile in your entire organization. So, that goes down to your overall life safety. There's a lot of different factors in there. But then it's also about managing the risk of, litigation. And I hate going down that road, but it's a reality, talking about litigation and what is preventable and what is negligence. We're also talking about improving the resident experience. Going through an outbreak or any sort of major water system interruption is extremely painful not painful, but it's extremely uncomfortable for the residents. You're coming in, your bottled water, bagged ice, these point of use filters. It's a really poor resident experience. So we're trying to right that. And then getting into regulatory compliance. Of course, that is a huge topic in the senior living industry. And I think that one's pretty straightforward. We're required to have water management plans that take into consider the ASHRAE standard, the CDC toolkit, and getting those in place. And then cost savings and cost avoidance. If you're avoiding cases, you're avoiding very big bills, and not Bill Pearson, you're avoiding big invoices from organizations. You're not having massive filter orders, but it's also cost savings in the fact of you can leverage your buying power. If we're looking across a portfolio of 100 buildings, there's a lot of buying power that you can have to say, okay, when I tested all my buildings, what's a rock bottom price that I can get? And I'm not advocating for anyone to go out and just, really try to nickel and dime testing costs, but there is a benefit in just buying smarter and buying better. And you can even implement outsourced third-party water management plans for a much lower cost if you're kind of taking as a bundle instead of leaving it up to the individual building. So, with that all being said, these outcomes in our experience working with senior living organizations has helped us put together a comprehensive view of the aspects of water management that need to be covered in senior living. And this is where I love this beautiful graphic that our wonderful marketing team has put together around corporate water management strategy. So, as I mentioned before, water and water management are extremely complex. There's so many things organizations have to think about on a daily basis that is extremely difficult to spend the time to map out what it takes to cover everything related to water. So we did it for you. And our team spent some time analyzing the engagements we've had since starting to work with TELS back in 2017. And they boiled down to these topics. First is asset management. For my cooling towers, closed loop systems, boilers, it might seem weird that we're bringing that into this equation, but how am I managing my assets? Am I standardizing my water treatment programs across the portfolio? Do I have water treatment at all my buildings? And we'll dive into that a little bit later and really like to tap into Bill's expertise as a longtime water treater. Construction and renovation, huge opportunity in this area. Am I buying a building that has Legionella already in the pipes? We've seen more and more cases over the last, year or so where somebody has acquired a building and within a month, they've experienced a case, an outbreak, a significant test result that has led to, almost making that building unprofitable because of the way that they need to go about that. So really understanding what's in the building as you're buying it. Emergency preparedness. This is something that we're going to hit on later in the presentation, but with Hurricane Ian, with the increase in water main breaks, what are the plans in place to help prepare for those situations? And then we have regulatory compliance and safety. We've hit on this one ad nauseum. How do I give my regulators what they want in terms of my building? Then we have our maintenance excellence. How am I actually completing the service? How am I documenting my activities? What is the training and education that I am using to deliver and execute on this water management plan? And then last is risk management, which we hit on the last slide. How do I reduce my overall risk profile? So, this is a really comprehensive view that we wanted to put together to say, these are the key areas that I need to hit on in order to have a very covered program and think proactively. And when we work with organizations, we're oftentimes helping them across this entire spectrum. And what I'd like to do now is shift into a real world example of how we leverage this strategy, how we leverage these buckets to help an organization improve their outcomes. So as we move forward, I've got Siri going off in my ear for a second. So what we'd like to do is, as we're moving forward and shifting into a real world scenario, is talk about how we help senior living organizations optimize their water treatment profile or in program. So it's a very simple and powerful 3-step process we undertake within the senior living world with senior living organizations. And it starts by understanding exactly what it is they're trying to get done. Again, this can be an individual building, it can be across a region or a portfolio. Once we've defined that goal, we do thorough research and discovery to understand their current state, and then deliver and help to execute a plan to drive that desired outcome we established in the first step. And this model, again, can be used in a variety of different ways. And what I'll say is that we find in a portfolio that you have buildings that are doing everything correctly, very good, very proactive, and then you have some that need a lot of help. And it's really about, how do we bring everyone to a common theme and a common standardized goal? And again, Legionella and water safety is a very complex topic. You're learning as you go. And within a senior living facility, there are hundreds of things you have to worry about on a given day, and it's not just water safety. So I just want to kind of set the scene and outline that standardization process, and we'll dive into what this organization and real world scenario looks like. So within our sort of case study here, we're going to work with a organization to define their goal. So for this real world example, we're going to focus on a nationwide senior living organization that is comprised of both skilled nursing and senior living buildings, AKA regulated and non-regulated communities. They recently experienced multiple locations with suspected cases of Legionnaire's disease and want to prevent this from happening at other buildings in their portfolio because it was extremely expensive and painful, and they want to just avoid it. So, when we look at their portfolio, one additional variable as we look across it is that 10% of this chain's buildings have cooling towers, which means additional risk and water considerations for them. And so just to boil it down again, this organization's goal is to avoid cases of Legionnaire's disease in their portfolio overall. So now that we've defined the goal of avoiding cases of Legionnaire's disease, we have picked out some low-hanging fruit pieces and aspects of the water management program that we think will help to drive the largest impact to achieving their goals. So if we look at step 2 here, the aspects that we're looking at in their overall program are their water management plans. So what do these buildings have in terms of water management plans right now? Then validation testing program. In addition, we talked about some of the preparedness and some of the emergency. What do people have in place for water system interruptions? Are we proactively thinking about things like water main breaks? And we'll dive into that in a little bit. And then what do the cooling tower water treatment programs look like? Is there treatment happening? Who is performing those? So what we do is we gather information in each of these categories in these buckets to understand what is being done today and compare it to what the ideal state should be. And at the end, in step 3, what we'll see is an overall scorecard. So, nobody better here to talk about water management plans than Bill Pearson, who was the vice chair of the ASHRAE 188 committee. So I'm going to do a little introduction as to what we look for in a water management plan audit. I'm also going to show you an example of a plan that was submitted from this example organization. And we're going to talk about the pros and the cons to it. And then we'll have Bill add in some of his commentary around water management plans, because it is such a complex topic and a lot of problems can be solved with a proper water management plan. But when we go in and work with an organization, our first question is, do you have a water management plan at each of your locations? So in this chain, only the skilled nursing facilities have water management plans in place, and the senior living buildings do not. This is a very common combination of water management plan implementation strategies. And for the locations that have water management plans, we want to make sure that they have all of the components of the ASHRAE 188 program or the 188 standard. So, what we want to do is understand, do they have program team members? Is there a description of the water systems, flow diagrams, risk factors? The biggest area that we see lacking are control measures, control limits, and corrective actions. And then documentation. Are you documenting the activities in the plan? It's pretty cut and dry. So if you do not have a water management plan that falls in line with that ASHRAE 188 standard, regardless of the care type that you offer, our first suggestion is to implement that water management plan. And it's really important to consider who it is that's developing that water management plan. And there's pros and cons of different organizations, and Bill will hit on the development of that. But, I want to move forward and talk about an example of a water management plan that we have actually received and, look through. So this is an example of a plan, like I said. And the good news is that this organization, this sample organization that we're talking about, was proactive in implementing a corporate policy. What we will see many times is that the corporate policy is mistaken for a water management plan, and we print that out, we put it in our binder, and we're showing the surveyor that water manager or that corporate policy, and it's acting as a water management plan. So this building did a really good job of developing an on-site risk assessment. So a very comprehensive risk assessment. And what I will say is that this document was 75 pages overall. That is an extremely lengthy and cumbersome water management plan. And many aspects of it were just kind of cobbled together. And it didn't really satisfy that ASHRAE 188, requirement. And so what I do want to say is that this had a really good risk assessment, which you'll see on the left here, really calling out some of the facility characteristics, diving deep into the facility to implement or to have that risk assessment. They also had a really good water system flow diagram. And Bill will attest to this. We see a variety of different flow diagrams, anything from, a little bit of napkin, drawn out on a napkin to a piece of paper and scanned in. But this was a really good flow diagram. The other thing as we move forward is that this is a page where they have outlined their program, which is really nice. One area to take note of on the next slide, where we have more documentation, is it says review at monthly QAPI meeting. And we really want to be mindful and cognizant of the commitments we are making in a water management plan, because a facility is going to be beholden to what is documented or what is put in that water management plan. And we really want to make sure we're doing exactly what we say we're going to do. So if we say we're going to review at the monthly QAPI meeting, we got to do it, and we have to document that. So the first thing we'll ask is, okay, show me the notes from that. In addition, we want to make sure that we are including only relevant documentation. So what you'll see on the right side of the screen is the CDC toolkit. And this is a very common item that we see, is people just print out the CDC toolkit, put it in with all their other cobbled together documentation, and say, here it is. Here's my program. There's a lot of information. Here you go. Our opinion, or what somebody could take from this is, listen, you've proven right here that you have the resource in place with the CDC toolkit to develop a proper water management plan. However, what we saw and what we looked at, so our final scorecard of this example water management program is that they had the facility risk assessment, they had their program team outlined, is what you'll see on the left side, they had their flow diagram, and they had their descriptions of the water system. What they did not have are risk factors, control measures, control limits, corrective actions, and no way to document that activity. So, what could be interpreted from this is, listen, you've included the CDC toolkit in this water management plan. You've proven that you knew to do these things, but you haven't actually put them in your water management plan. So that could be scrutinized down the road. So that is what we look at as we're evaluating water management plans. And as we are literally having an organization submit to us their water management plans, we're going through this scorecard to identify some of the shortcomings. So that is kind of a real world example that we see. And with that, I kind of want to turn it over to Bill to get your thoughts on water management plans and what you like to see as you're evaluating, organizations' plans and as they're being submitted.
I'd like to show this. Jack's already talked about it a little bit. And this deals with your water mains. Everyone asks, how does Legionella, where does it come from? Is it coming in the air, in my windows, or where is it coming from? It's coming to your potable water system from your municipal supply. And here you can see the inside of a water main. That's nasty. Yes, there's a lot of corrosion byproducts, but by and large, most of this is sediment and biofilm. And within that community, we have bacteria, not just Legionella, but other what we call opportunistic pathogens. So if we advance on, I'd like to talk about water main breaks just briefly, because we have probably found, certainly in the last 2-3 years, that our senior living space and the water management plans we develop and the knowledge level that a lot of these facilities have is pretty good in that STAR approach that Jack mentioned. And that's an acronym, STAR, where you talk about the sediment that could be in your water. You talk about how important the temperature of the water is, and you talk about the age of the water, where it could be stagnant within the building, either within dead legs or within seldom used or unoccupied rooms. Then you talk about the residual disinfectant. So that's where the STAR, sediment, temperature, age, residual disinfectant. But then when we ask, do you have a plan, and do you know the consequence of water main breaks? Well, they kind of scratch their head and they say, well, that's the purview, and that's what the municipal has to deal with. And I said, well, that's also where your water supply comes in, and these water main breaks have consequences. When a water main breaks, contaminants are able to enter the water system, your building water system, and this can introduce Legionella bacteria into your water supply, even if there was previously no evidence of it in the system. So when flushing and treating the water flowing, the repair of a water main break, it's important to address the potential of this Legionella contamination. The numbers are staggering. There's approximately 240,000 water main breaks occur annually in the US. And as a side note, that's wasting some 2 trillion, I said trillion with a T, gallons of treated drinking water. And so the report card even gets scarier from the American Civil Engineers report card on this infrastructure. They estimate that there's now 1 million miles of pipes delivering drinking water across our country that have either reached or are fast approaching the end of their lifespans. So this is a significant area to be concerned with, and should be a part of your water management plan. And we always like to emphasize or encourage, that the facilities have some communication with the municipal water supply. There may be a reason for you to want to engage and actually ask them for some help. If you're getting very low residuals of disinfectant at your facility, there are things that they can actually do. And certainly in addressing water main breaks, when a break occurs, it happens without notice, but they quickly put notice out, and you certainly want to be on that chain. So this is just a very important topic of water main breaks. If we'll move on, I can let you know that the construction, it's not just a water main break, but construction that you may be having to your facility or one around. And construction is on your building. It's much like a water main break. It can introduce Legionella into a system that previously had no issues, because construction involves adding to or modifying, your existing pipes or structures. So the risk of outside contamination is always present. So we want to be vigilant in this area. We also know that vibrations and changes in water pressure along the line can dislodge biofilm. That might be flushing hydrants, downstream or even upstream, and this will have an impact. So we always have that ever presence potential that we're going to get Legionella introduced into our system. And it's something you may not test for, or you can test for it and you don't see it today, but you may have it tomorrow. And we'll talk more about importance of testing. So if we move on to the next slide, it is about testing. And this is something that Jack touched on, the ASHRAE 188 standard, among other things, the flow diagrams and establishing control limits. What temperature should I be maintaining, and how much residual disinfectant should I be checking on, has 2 important aspects. You must be able to show through documentation that you are doing what the water management plan says you should be doing. Jack said if the water management plan calls for monthly meetings, show that you're holding these monthly meetings, have notes. But another important aspect is you need to be able to supply information that validates that the plan is working. The plan's no good if you follow it, but yet it doesn't produce any results. So we call that validation testing. The most direct way to find out if you are controlling Legionella in your water system is to test for it. So we'll talk more about, there's other reasons for testing when you get involved with looking at a source during an investigation. But validation testing should be spelled out in your water management plan. And you want to implement this, we always recommend quarterly testing and to include the incoming city water for the reason I just mentioned. We have, over the last 2 or 3 years, absolutely not enforced, but highly recommended, because they were saying, well, I thought you want to check the water in our rooms, in our showers, in our ice machines, etc. But we didn't want to check for the source. And it can really help out in locating, problems with the incoming city water. So testing protocol and response activity is very important. You're going to be doing validation testing to see if your water management plan is successful, is working. And many times you're going to get Legionella positive tests and results. Remember, Jack said, and I like this, our goal is to not have any cases of Legionella pneumonia or Legionnaire's disease in our facility. That goal does not necessarily include always having non-detectable Legionella. We know that it is prevalent in the environment. It gets into our water systems. And the CDC just this past year gave us some new, I very much welcomed guidance and not admitting, but pointing out that you can have very low levels, detected levels, and it will still represent having a system that is in control. We have an odd situation here. We talk about detectable Legionella. There's no such thing as zero, because there is a limit of detection. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that has improved significantly. Our laboratories now can detect Legionella. It used to be just a few years ago that it was 10 CFUs. That's how you measure Legionella colony-forming units per milliliter was the limit of detection. And then it got down to 1. We could detect 1 CFU, colony-forming unit. That means that would be a positive. Then most recently, or actually before last year, we were down to 0.1. That is 0.1 colony-forming unit. And to the chagrin of a lot of people, just at the tail end of the year, our laboratories have been given the ability to test down to 0.05. Now, I'm not trying to drag you into the weeds of microbiology or testing, but what this means is you're going to have a lot more positive results. And that doesn't mean that your program is not working. The goal is 0 cases of disease, and it doesn't necessarily line up with always getting non-detectable Legionella. But we could live with that with proper responses depending on whatever we get from the testing.
Yeah, and Bill, I think that's a really good point. And what we find is that some companies will just dive into testing and not be prepared for, hey, I'm going and filling up a bottle of water and I'm going to get results back. And so, through this test organization and this sample organization that we're working with, what we find and this is very standard is that, it's really left up to the building to determine whether or not they're testing. And then they don't really know what they're going to do when those results come back. And it's like, kind of you're kind of figuring it out as you go. And that can be very stressful for an organization. As if you test, you might find it. and you got to know what you're looking for. So that's where we've seen some value in working with customers to say, hey, here's what this is telling you, and establishing those protocols, which you're about to walk through.
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. And I appreciate you pointing that out. And that's what these two slides kind of show us: a level 1 and a level 2 and a level 3. These are just examples. You might have a test result come back and you only tested one location. We call that certainly less than a representative number of samples. So when you only take 1 or 2 samples from a facility, you might have several floors. You may have over 100 outlets or 200. That's not going to be a representative sampling. So you don't get a great deal of data from that other than what it is, if it's positive, and at what level. And so you're going to have to act on that to every one of those positives. You're going to have to implement flushing. We usually recommend flushing, daily for a week or two, a minimum of 5 minutes. And then you always review your water management plan anytime you are addressing positive results. And in this first case, you might even consider expanding the sampling plan to get a representative number of samples, because we have data. We have a lot of data out there that relates to, it's the percent positivity out of, if you take 20 samples and 2 of them come back positive, well, that's 10%. Our data shows us that the risk there is less, much less than if you have a positivity of 30% or higher. That's kind of a magic mark that research has shown us. The CDC is backed it. I think the original research was done, Special Pathogens Lab, Dr. Janet Stout. But many of our plans written refer to that percent positivity. So the point I'm trying to make out here, because we have limited time, this is just a very important part of the plan, is to have a company, to have a consultant that does this, not just part-time, on a full-time basis. They are subject matter experts, because it's a complicated set of data that you get. It's not just how many samples you took. It's not just how many are positive. And it's not just at what level. Did you get 5 CFUs or did you get 500? It also, and now I'm getting back into the microbiology, we mentioned earlier in the basics, there's over 60 identified species of Legionella. Well, they're not all equally pathogenic. Some, almost half of them, have been associated with disease, but by and large, one species stands out head and shoulders above all the rest, and that, you probably heard this, that's Legionella pneumophila. That one species is 90 to 95% of all Legionella pneumonia cases, in the report in the U.S. Are come from this exposure to this species. So, as I said, there's a lot of data that comes from our testing, and we have to deal with all those different aspects to give us our response activity. And these levels 1, 2, and 3, they might mention, well, okay, you got a fixture and it had kind of a high level. We'll recommend, let's clean that fixture. Let's take it apart. Let's take the aerator off. Let's take it apart. Let's soak it in a bleach solution, sodium hypochlorite, for 15 minutes, put it back on. That's to take care of, any biofilm that can be right there in the fixture. You also have biofilm in the rest of the building water, or you could have it in the pipes flowing up to it, but that's handled usually with flushing. So if we'll move on to the next slide, I think it shows level 3. This is just for your information to show that there's so many things that need to be addressed. We're talking about validation testing at this point. This is not an investigation into a case. That goes down another road. You're usually dealing with a Department of Health, and they're going to be given a lot of guidance as to what they want to see in terms of the testing results. And if you are in a case investigation or looking for a suspect case, first and foremost is the safety of the residents. And so if testing shows you have Legionella, and this is where the Departments of Health get pretty strict, and we can understand that. It's their objective to prevent, to err on the side of public health. They want to prevent exposure to that Legionella till you get it under control. And that will involve installing medical grade 0.2 micron. That's a very small filter in terms of the size. And at that level, you can filter out any Legionella bacteria in the water source and thus be able to use it. So 0.2 micron medical grade filter. You're going to want to possibly go on bottled water if you don't have any sources of water that aren't going through a filter. You may have to use bagged ice if you don't have your ice machine with a filter on it. So a lot of things go into our consulting ability to help the client when they get their test results.
Yeah. And what I like to do is kind of compare this. We're in football season right now, at a great weekend of football, depending on, what side you're on in some of these games. And, I kind of think of it as kind of presetting the decisions and making sure that we're ready for what's coming. And, in the sense of football, I know when I'm going for it on fourth down, I've got that kind of sheet and the data out there and I'm prepared. Like if I need a filter provider, I know where to get those. If I need bottled water and bagged ice, it's kind of having that go bag and being able to kind of take those and run with it. And, again, helping an organization kind of talk through and preset these will take a lot of the motion and the fear and the craziness out of it. And it's about being proactive in how you get there. And if you find a level 1, 2, or 3, again, it's not bad because you have it. And you can do something about it a lot quicker before somebody gets sick. So this is all about being proactive, validating that water management plan. And you might come across a situation where Brian Pickett, who many people have worked with, is calling you and saying, hey, we need to get on a call because we got some results back and just need to talk through that response activity.
Well, Jack, that goes back to the water management plan. A key component of the water management plan, according to ASHRAE 188, is to have a contingency or emergency response plan. Don't wait until you've gotten, test results. What do we do? We've got a bunch of Legionella, or till you get that knock on the door from the Department of Health, and in their tracking system, they say that, we've got record because it is a reportable disease, a required reportable disease in the United States to report to the local DOHs and all the way up to the CDC cases of Legionella pneumonia. So you might get a knock on the door, one or more of your residents has recently tested positive for Legionnaire's disease. Then you're going to have a whole host of answers to their questions. And that can be well taken care of with a good water management plan with an emergency response plan. So I think the next slide, because we are getting a little ahead of ourselves, we're sticking with the potable water system, which is very important because that's the bulk, of our exposure and our senior living space. In that example portfolio, as Jack said, only 10% of the buildings were large enough to have what we call water-cooled refrigeration or cooling towers. And so let's just take a little quick mention about cooling tower water treatment. Now, this is still part of the overall umbrella of managing the water in your portfolio, in your program. It's not just the water and the potable system, but in this case, it's a device that's also associated with Legionnaire's disease. Some 22% of the cases, this is second only to the potable water systems, where 56% of the cases are associated with bacteria causing Legionnaire's disease. So the cooling tower water treatment evaluation, I'm going to leave it very simple. We have not run into a facility yet that provides their own water treatment. So the big note here is cooling tower water treatment should be contracted out to a professional water treatment services provider. This is something that comes in on a regular basis. You'll have to buy your biocide, your corrosion inhibitor, your scale inhibitor, and your deposit control chemicals from this supplier. You're not going to be able to get them on your own. And then they have all the wherefore know and knowledge to do testing and make sure that you're feeding the right amount, you're getting the right results. So cooling tower water treatment, leave it to the professionals, but whatever they're doing, that needs to be noted in your water management plan. I think we have a next slide, Jack, that you
Absolutely.
want to talk about the so-called portfolio scorecard. I
Yeah.
like that. So let you take it from here.
Yeah, I'm, Bill, you know me, I'm a simple guy, right? And I like to boil things down to a red, yellow, and green. So as we're working through phase 2 of the water management plan or water program evaluation process, we are scoring organizations in each of these categories. So we just highlighted water management plans. Do you have water management plans at your facilities? If so, does it fall into, do you have all the required documentation? Then we get into the testing program. First, do you test? And in this organization, what we found is that the skilled nursing buildings test, but the senior living buildings not only don't test, but they don't have water management plans in place. So extremely exposed. And then moving on, monitoring activities and preparation. This is very standard to what we see where, I get a water management plan, but it doesn't address, the instances of water main breaks and construction. These are very, more advanced topics, but we see it lead to cases and positivity if you don't monitor these things and aren't vigilant around water main breaks, these interruptions, on campus major plumbing repairs. How often are you shutting water down for a certain amount of time? You're changing pressure. So this is an area of opportunity that I think everyone could take coming out of this call to look at. Am I looking for water main breaks? As I'm driving into a building, am I noticing construction around? We had a facility recently that we were working with, and we went on site to do some sampling, and they're just wondering about their ongoing positivity, and they're just trying to figure out how the heck did this all of a sudden pop up in my building. And I was in the car with Brian Pickett. We were on our way to the community, and a quarter of a mile down the road, we see major construction happening to their water system. There's big pipes happening on the road, and we're like, well, here's likely a source of this issue. You're having construction, vibration, and it's interrupting that water system. So it's just really about building the knowledge and awareness around it. Again, you have a million things to worry about on a daily basis. So we're just trying to put some nuggets into your mind about things to think about. And then on the cooling tower water treatment side, I think this is, outside of the Legionella potable side, probably the biggest area of opportunity within senior living. We've done analysis of portfolios in not just this example portfolio, but around the country. And the bar for water treatment in senior living is very low. And that's because water treatment's a very foreign topic. You're dealing with pHs and conductivity and iron and copper. And it's a very complex, set of constraints that you're working with. And it's chemical, it's biocides, corrosion inhibitors, all these things. But what we're finding is that senior living organizations aren't getting what they pay for when it comes to water treatment. So, hey, you might be dosing it with, a controller from 1980 that has one pump that has it's very analog, and it's just feeding a corrosion inhibitor. There's no biocide, which is allowing, the foam, you saw the foam in that cooling tower, to grow, which means biocide and other things. Again, Bill's the water treater, but, you can walk up to a cooling tower and look and see, very clearly whether or not it's being provided. So our advice to this organization as we move forward, so we take all this data that we see and we move forward into our phase 3, which is, okay, 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, what are my recommendations? And this is how we optimize. So, this isn't rocket science here, but it's about gathering the data to say, take your skilled nursing buildings and make sure that those water management plans that you have at your skilled nursing buildings are up to the ASHRAE 188 standard. Fill in the gaps of that plan where it's needed. It might not need a whole, invasive site visit by a Legionella consultant. You very well could start fresh. It might be, hey, how do I tweak what I'm missing in my program? The second part is for the buildings that don't have water management plans in place, outsource that to a third party. And I say that because you are offloading a tremendous amount of risk. And our founder and president Brian Waymeyer likes to say it's the big red easy button. have somebody that knows what they're looking at come in, conduct that risk assessment, develop the water management plan so that you can answer what are you doing and why are you doing it very clearly to say, I work with a third-party Legionella consultant. This is what they've recommended for us to do. We have worked with them hand in hand to put this in place, and here's what it is. So it's a very scalable way to get out there and make that happen. The second piece of this is beginning a validation testing program. Again, you should have a water management plan in place before you begin a validation testing program. The other type of testing, and there's 5 different goals of testing programs or 6 different goals of testing programs. If you don't have a water management plan in place, that can be part of the risk assessment. We really want to guide organizations to test if they're doing something about it. Otherwise, it's not validating. It could be validating that you're not doing anything today, but you want to make sure that you're doing something before you go and start testing in a validation, and then understand who's going to pull the samples. Really design all of that. Do they have the baseline knowledge? And then how am I actually going to put this in place? And so there are automated, auto ship testing companies out there that you can work with across your portfolio that really understand your program and what you're trying to do. But what it boils down to is before you begin a testing program, make sure you know what you're going to do with the results and how you're going to report things and how you're going to talk through the entire program. But water management plan, testing, and then document your activities. And there's, I think, 14,000 buildings right now on TELS. So use the tools you have in front of you. And I have to imagine the audience that's on this direct supply webinar, there's a large number of organizations that are leveraging TELS today. So go in and leverage TELS to provide that documentation. If you have a monthly coffee meeting to talk about your water management plan, put a task in TELS to say, we're doing it. You can input the notes, check that task off. I mean, it's really a seamless integration. So it's about using the tools that you have, using the resources that you have. So then what we would do is we would tie this all up in a bow and help execute with this organization on this plan. So really, we want to make sure that we're looking at all those aspects of water management. We're identifying the strengths and the weaknesses of our current program and then implementing a solid plan to reduce cases of Legionnaire's disease in our building. So that is the end of our evaluation process, and we can move on to, I'll flip it back over to Amber. I think you're on mute, Amber.
Well, thank you, Jack and Bill, for the great expertise you just provided us. I know we covered a lot of information, so let's kick over to the Q&A section of the webinar. We've had a lot of questions come in, but if you would like to ask a question and you're in full screen, you'll need to exit out of that, and then you should be able to see the Q&A icon on the right side panel. Let's just get started. I'll ask a question we hear a lot. Jack or Bill, I don't know which one you would want to take for this, but why are ice machines such a risk factor when it comes to Legionella?
I'm going to trump Jack on this one because I was actually in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, back in 2013 when I say we, the industry, first associated or found out the need to associate ice machines with causing Legionella pneumonia or Legionnaire's disease. So this was a large hospital that had a very robust plan in place. They tested their cooling towers, they tested their potable water, they tested everything and had excellent control, basically most of the time non-detectable. But all of a sudden they had a patient that was put in ICU or was in ICU who developed Legionella pneumonia. Positive tests, they took sputum and they grew Legionella bacteria, and they said, well, where's it coming from? Well, again, long story short, they thought that this patient, because of the condition in ICU, was only allowed to sip or what we call chew on, ice chips. And they said, well, you know what? Let's check the ice machines. They checked their ice machines and they had many, and over 20% had Legionella bacteria, serogroup 1 in high levels. So we've been talking about Legionella likes warm temperatures. In fact, most facilities don't have the temperatures hot enough to kill Legionella or keep it from growing. So what's the deal with ice? Well, picture this. You've got your ice machine that is supplied by your city water. It goes through some filtration, but that's carbon filtration. And guess what carbon filters do? They remove chlorine, so any disinfectant. So now we've taken out the disinfectant, and then we have that water residing in maybe several feet of copper tubing that's coiled up behind the ice machine, and the ice machine is generating a lot of heat, compressor and other parts. So now that water is stagnant, no disinfectant, and it's at 90 degrees, maybe 85 degrees, certainly within the growing range of Legionella. And so we find it in our ice. Ice does not kill it. It's dormant then. But a patient, taking the ice chips, they're going to melt in their mouth, quickly be almost brought to body temperature, 90 plus degrees. And so the Legionella is there and they can be aspirated. So that's why CDC put that on. A little bit of a long explanation, but I always like to talk about that because I was there.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder and think next time you get ice water for sure. We had this next question asked in multiple different ways, but I like the wording on this one. So for us in the nursing homes, what is the testing policy as far as how often are we to be testing for Legionella via CMS?
So this is we could do an hour and a half just on this topic. And it's been really interesting because we work with many people around the country, and we've been getting a lot of different calls from California, from Pennsylvania, from certain states where it seems like surveyors and people are asking for testing. Now, when it comes to CMS, they want you to validate your water management program in some way, shape, or form. The most effective way to do that is by testing for Legionella. So my thought is that there are certain areas where surveyors are starting to interpret that as testing. I want to see testing. Now, Bill, if you would want to I think it would be great for you to highlight New York in some of the requirements that they have out there, because that is the strictest state that we have in the United States.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jack. Jumping in here, certainly New York that experienced an outbreak in 2015, the South Bronx, oddly, almost within weeks of ASHRAE publishing the infamous 188 Legionella standard. The first publication of it was in 2015 in June. And so here we had this coincidence of events. That outbreak ultimately, had over 120, 130 people with Legionella pneumonia, unfortunately killing 18. So it was a big deal. You couldn't be any more higher profile than in New York City. And so they passed emergency regulation that was later passed into law. So they do require cooling towers to be sampled on a quarterly basis or every 90 days in operation for Legionella. And later on, they ultimately addressed the healthcare facilities in requiring that they test their potable water systems to set up a baseline. So this question, when we get it asked in the senior living space, they're outside of any law or regulation, in your state or in your locality, then it is part of the water management plan, and that's left up to the team. And that's an awesome task for the team, the water management team that's part of the water management plan, to make that decision. So there is nothing dictating other than you need to provide evidence that your water management plan is working. So again, this is something we could talk a long time about. I like what a lot of our clients have done across the nation, several large portfolio. They will do validation testing on a small scale in terms of they'll take maybe 5 or 10 samples on a quarterly basis and then go from there. And as Jack said, probably one of the single most important points about testing is you never test without a plan in place. You have a plan in place when you're testing to validate your water management plan. and you're looking to have non-detectables, or when you have positives, then you'll have a response to how you're going to deal with those positives.
Yeah, and can I piggyback on the five for a second? So, when the natural question is, okay, five, where do I take them from? Bill, I don't know if you have any commentary on that, but usually it's
absolutely, Jack. And let me start.
Yeah.
When you take 5, that's hardly a representative sampling. So what the scenario is this: you're testing and you're doing a good job. You're getting non-detects. Now all of a sudden you send in 5 samples and 1 or 2 or more of them come back positive. What we are immediately going to recommend is we're going to address those positives, and then you're going to always retest positives, and then you're going to expand that sampling plan now to give us a better footprint, a better idea of how extensive the colonization could be in the building. Now, this is where you start adding the important sample points. You'll always collect, we always recommend the incoming city water or your incoming source water. Then let's go to the big problem system, the hot water system. You want to take your hot water storage tanks and you want to clearly test your recirculation, hot water recirculation line back to those, to your hot water boilers, or however you're producing, your hot water, storing it. So that's where we find most problems. Unfortunately, in this space, we do have a concern for scalding. We have local and state codes that require the receiving proximal, what we call locations, cannot exceed 118 or 120. Some cases it's down quite low, like 113. Now that's a problem because if you send out 113 degree water, it's going to quickly drop, and you're in a sweet zone for growing there. So remember, that's just one aspect. That just puts more weight on other parts of the control program, like your residual disinfectant, getting rid of dead legs, having robust flushing, tending to the seldom used outlets. So I hope I didn't get too long on that, Jack, but it's a very good question.
Yep. And actually, we had several questions come in about specifically how do you monitor your water main activities that are happening, if there's a break, if they're flushing fire hydrants elsewhere. I know you guys touched on that as the main inlet to your building, but is there anything else that you would add to those comments or concerns about your water main and how it affects your building?
Yeah, and Amber, that is a great question. I'm afraid I got so excited about talking about water mains because that's seldom, it's seldom mentioned, and we're seeing it more and more important. So, what do you do? I think you're familiar with, you'll get notice when there's a large enough water main break. They'll send you a note saying, okay, boil your water. It's what they call a brown water vent. Boil your water until further notice. And what they're doing is trying to repair things and get the chlorine level or disinfectant level back up. What you need to recognize, though, that occurrence alone could have dislodged and brought in Legionella bacteria. So you're going to want to test Legionella. Hopefully, it may line up with your regular quarterly testing program if you're testing quarterly, or if not, if it's significant enough, the event, you may just want to go ahead and do one and see if you have any positives in your building. I guess the other thing is just to know that, to be aware of that connection. So when you read about or hear notice of, or if in your testing you detect, all of a sudden you've had non-detects, now all of a sudden you have some positives, especially if you have an incoming city water, to contact your supplier, municipal supplier, and inquire as to any known events that have been occurring.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Bill. Anything else to add, Jack, before we move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say there are some there's legislation being kicked around alerting or alerting buildings to water main breaks. I believe the state of Illinois either has passed or is about to pass. Well, we've seen a lot of these proposed, but notification to buildings that have been affected by a water main break within 30 days of that happening. So it is really kind of a big deal that people are starting to monitor more closely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I can tell you we have about 5 minutes before we start to lose people. So I'll do one more question and then we'll move to the product section of it. And don't worry, we will actually send out an email with all answers to all the questions that were submitted. So we appreciate all the interest and overall questions that have been coming through the Q&A. So Bill and Jack, my last question for you, there's been several questions asked of what type of information should you expect back from your testing? And is there any red flags of data that you're not seeing from your lab that should make you consider looking elsewhere or finding a different supplier?
I'm going to interject real quick and then pass it over to Bill. But I do want to say we're always open to these conversations. If you get in contact with TELS, we can absolutely get on and help talk through any specific scenario. But, you know, it really is what you first want to do is choose the lab correctly. You want a CDC Elite certified lab, and you want to understand some of their qualifications. And no two labs are built equally. A lab isn't a lab. There are different proficiencies and certifications that a lab may have. We leverage, you know, two of the best labs in the country for our testing and really scrutinize, you know, the different plates that they use, the processes, and things like that. So first, you know, where I like to begin is the lab itself that you're utilizing. But I will pass it over to Bill to talk about, you know, what information should be displayed on a Legionella test report and, you know, limits of detection and the information you want to see on that.
Yeah, it is an excellent question because there are a lot of laboratories, and there are a lot of laboratories that are recognized as CDC Elite, but you still want to deal with they could have gotten that in the last year or two. So don't forget your first resource would be your local, and if not your local, your state Department of Public Health, the DPH or the DOH. And if they don't have any guidance to help you with, and I would be surprised if they didn't, most of these departments of health, if you go to the website, they'll not only have information on Legionnaire's disease, they'll have information on laboratories and other resources. And if not, go to the CDC, you know, website. They have a tremendous amount of information that can help you out. But real quick, get into the microbiology. You want a lab that's going to be able to tell you the species. Right now, the gold standard is still culturing Legionella bacteria. And unfortunately, that's a 10 to 14 day deal. But you need to know the species of Legionella. And if it's Legionella pneumophila, you want to know the serotype, because Legionella serogroup 1 is pneumophila serogroup 1 is our most causative Legionella. So speciation and ability to detect down to the current, I like to say 0.1, even though some labs are going lower than that level of detection.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And it's actually a great transition over to product, because I think Bill and Jack are being very hesitant to say that. I would tell you IWC is truly the biggest factor in there. Of you're not going to understand some of the data that's coming back to your lab. So having a partner that's able to help create action plans for you based on that is a key component. So I just wanted to at least wrap this up with telling you that TELS and Direct Supply has a water management solution that we can help you with. I'm the product manager, and today we are able to help you with preventing through plan development, confirming that you do or don't have it, and having testing to evaluate where your system is having issues. And then also we're here for remediations. I can tell you we talk to the DOH on a regular basis, and I would tell you not to talk to them without having a consultant of some sort on your side that can actually help you manipulate through the different components that are there. It's a stressful scenario for your facility and your corporation. So make sure you have a good partner on your side. And lastly, Jack talked a lot about water treatment, even with cooling towers. We're here to help you. And I'll tell you the main benefit of coming through TELS is that we actually create TELS tasks. So actually showing that you're implementing and using your plan. We have specific tasks created for your facility based on the control measures that we see and what is needed within that building. Additionally, all documents are uploaded into TELS platform so that you can easily see what the last test results were. You can see your active plan in place, and you can see all of those TELS tasks being completed by your facility. Lastly, I would say those last two bullets are the true benefit that IWC brings. Having a water consultant on your side and part of your building, knowing the details is a huge benefit, especially if something happens and an active case arises. And lastly, the data. I would tell you the data is very overwhelming when you're looking at it. So having a strategic partner that's actually helping you through, giving you those green, yellow, and red statuses just to be able to quickly make decisions and be able to act upon them. So really, that's all I have to say today. I can tell you that you should contact TELS. We have water management email address and a website. Really appreciate you taking the time today. Bill and Jack, thanks for all the great information. And this concludes our webinar for the day. Everyone have a great one.